So good morning, everyone, and you are very welcome here. My name is Robert Vitillo, and I serve as the Secretary General of the International Catholic Migration Commission, and it's a great privilege to be with you today and also to serve as the facilitator for our discussions today. Just to mention the major objectives that we have for this conference on HIV among migrants and refugees: strengthening collaboration among faith-based organizations, multilateral organizations, governments, and civil society in addressing HIV risk, provision of services, and advocacy. That sounds like a long list of objectives already in the title, but just a few of the main points that we want to look at together. And we hope that this session will be, that all of the sessions will be very much interactive and not just simply listening to people speaking at you, but we want to speak among each other, and that's why we have this configuration for the room. And also we have our wonderful souk in the back of us for more discussions during the day. So the main points we want to be able to concentrate on and focus on are to have an overview of the global situation of people on the move and HIV, the data, the challenges, and the potential solutions. And then to look at the policies and commitments on people on the move and HIV. A number of the international organizations, as well as our own faith-based organizations, have made commitments in major meetings, global meetings. So we want to look at those and see what's happening with them, because it's wonderful to make commitments, but it's another thing to implement them. Then to look at the role of the faith communities, faith leaders, and faith-based organizations to increase access to HIV prevention, testing, and treatment for migrants and refugees, and to eliminate stigma and discrimination and violence. And finally, together during these 2 days, we will construct a way forward, a map, a roadmap, and focus in that roadmap on partnerships and actions that we will do together. So it's a lot to do for 2 days. You will be very much active during these days, but I'm very grateful for all of you, and you will be sharing your own experiences and your own actions already, and we will all be able to learn from you. So please share with us during this time. I now would like to call on Reverend Dr. Olav Fykse Tveit, the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. I hope that all of you will give me permission not to read bios. First of all, Olav doesn't need much introduction. He's very well known, but for all of you, I'll mention the name and the title, and we will make available all of the bios at the end of the session. And please, if you have a speaker and have not given us your bio, please do that so we could have that included in the documentation. Olav, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you to all of you for being here. And it's an honor for us as World Council of Churches to host you and to also see this room being reshaped into another atmosphere, another reality, actually, of what you are here to discuss. I welcome you as friends, as colleagues, as partners, as sisters and brothers, representing a family of acronyms: UNAIDS, PEPFAR, ICMC, IOM, UNHCR, WHO, WCC, and the Anglican Communion. I think most of us know what this means, but it is the way we express ourselves and identify ourselves. But behind these acronyms, there are very strong partners, very strong organizations, and obviously also a very strong sign of commitment to work together. That is the message we want to share these days. So thank you to all of you, and particularly also to PEPFAR and UNAIDS for your trust and support through the faith initiatives we have together, and which is definitely also strengthening the voice of the World Council of Churches as a fellowship of 350 churches. to maintain HIV as a priority among the churches in many parts of the world. The Faith Initiative is also supporting WCC's work to promote universal access to prevention, to testing, to treatment, to care, and to support, to eliminate stigma and discrimination, and to address the root causes of vulnerability to HIV, saying together, we cannot leave anyone behind. The topic of this very special workshop, HIV among migrants and refugees, is for many reasons very relevant and timely. And the World Council of Churches has, together with our member churches, involved ourselves in many ways. How do we deal with the challenges migrants and refugees are facing in today's world, in all continents, And how do we deal with what I think we could call an irrational fear against migrants, particularly related that they carry with them higher risks, that they carry with them health vulnerabilities. But that is because they are often exposed to poor living and to working conditions, to social exclusion, to labor exploitation, to abuse and violence, including sexual violence. And we know that among them also female, children, and adolescent migrants are particularly vulnerable to different forms of exploitation. They have reasons to fear, not the hosts. But in the host countries, we have to acknowledge that they are underutilizing health services, also for the fear of deportation, or for lack of explicit access to health services, or to health insurances, or because of other barriers of language and cultural issues. And as we also have to discuss how migrants are often perceived even to be carriers of diseases, well, the truth is that they are victims of negligence and indifference, both during their travel, the journey, but also as they have arrived at the host country. And during these 2 days, you are invited to discuss different ways to strengthen this collaboration among faith-based organizations with multilateral organizations, governments, civil societies, and the many we represent. How can we address HIV and also TB risks and provisions of services? We are here together to strategize on joint advocacy efforts with and for migrants and refugees, including particularly those living with HIV. So, as faith-based organizations, we are honored and also a bit proud to say that we have played a critical role in responding to HIV since the start of the AIDS epidemic more than 35 years ago. My first conference about HIV/AIDS was that the then leader of UNAIDS came to Norway and said, the biggest problem we have is the faith-based communities. And I've learned that that is not the message anymore. And I'm happy to know that. Things have changed in these 35 years. But unfortunately, we know that also religious beliefs and practices are sometimes used to justify judgmental attitudes that still cause stigma and discrimination and weaken the global response to HIV. Therefore, we have more work to do. And still many faith-based organizations are delivering effective and high-quality HIV services, complementing the national public health programs in the countries most affected by HIV, as well as supporting and accompanying migrants and refugees in countries where their rights have been denied. So, as faith communities, more can and must be done to support migrants and refugees, and particularly also to protect them from HIV and TB, and to promote access to health care, prevention, and to take steps to reduce stigma, discrimination, and violence. So with this workshop, again, the WC is honored to create this platform among us as different stakeholders, And we want to see the progress and identifying actions related to migrants and refugees set in the 2016 Political Declaration on Ending AIDS and in the 2018 Political Declaration on TB. So in addition, today and tomorrow, governments, civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, UN agencies, academics, and other partners, you are here invited to identify an action-oriented roadmap for strengthening this faith-based organizations' engagement in collaboration with other sectors. And let me then, as one of the leaders of one of these faith communities leading this fellowship of churches, remind ourselves that Jesus was a migrant. He was born into powerlessness and persecution. His family were forced to flee from a tyrannic leader. And like so many today, among the refugees and migrants, the decisions to flee was based on the necessity to survive. So Jesus started his life as a displaced person, seeking refuge in a foreign land. But we also have many stories in our Bible about Jesus as a healer with compassion for all, who welcomed those who were stigmatized and excluded into the fellowship, whether it was because of diseases or other issues. And one of the names given to Jesus in the Bible is Emmanuel, which means God with us. And we believe that that is a name that shows God's compassion through Jesus with everybody also today, as a promise to nurture our hope, but also a challenge for us who say that we want to be followers of Jesus, to challenge exclusion and segregation and stigmatization. Our time, as before, needs very clear signs of inclusion and true and mutually accountable relations. So let us join our forces, let us work together to really welcome all the strangers and make them feel at home.
Thank you very much, Olav, for, first of all, acknowledging the strength that's here in this room, both among those who are coming from faith-based organizations, the multilateral organizations of people living with and affected by HIV and AIDS, and also a larger society of people that care about these issues. And also you raised the very important issue that conflict and violence are very much driving factors both for vulnerability to HIV and for forced migration. And so in many ways we have a common area that we need to occupy ourselves with, that we need to be sure that we're reaching out to, in the words of Pope Francis, to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate migrants and refugees throughout the world, but also to go beyond the usual types of care that we provide to people and work together to eliminate stigma and discrimination. We're very grateful for setting the scene for us during these 2 days. And now I'd like to call on next will be Tim Martineau, the Deputy Executive Director of UNAIDS, and he'll talk about the rationale for convening the consultation and its objectives.
Thank you very much, Father Bob. Thank you for hosting this meeting at the WCC. I think it's and I really want to congratulate everybody on this marvelous room. The last time I was here, it was very different, and it's a fantastic setup. And thanks for doing it. I also want to just to say a few words, really. To first of all, just thank the planning group for helping to organise this meeting. That's ICMC, the Anglican Communion, Islamic Relief. I'm going to do my acronyms now: WCC, IOM, UNHCR, and WHO. For the preparation of all this, and it's a fantastic agenda and a really full set of really big issues to deal with. You're going to be very busy for the next couple of days. But also we should really recognise PEPFAR for the funding that it's provided to organise this meeting and the support that it does give to us for our work and what we're trying to do collectively. Just really, I want to really stress the importance of this topic for UNAIDS. I think I'm not going to go into a whole set of statistics and numbers and issues. I think actually the prayer service earlier this morning actually did a very good job of just documenting and highlighting some of the really big issues that are out there, and our concern about the continuing rise in sort of large-scale population movement and what that means for our ambition and for our mandate around ending AIDS, and the need, as you've just said, Father Bob, to address these as joint issues and to see them as a common goal that we have to move forwards together. And obviously, that's really, really heightened and made more difficult within the context of migration and refugee populations, where so often there are constraints on access to services, whether it's physical, whether it's legal, whether a range of barriers to accessing what are really life-saving services. And I want to just make the point that I was delighted you made the mention of TB as well. I think if we can look at HIV and the issues around TB, not necessarily to take it all on, but look at the commonalities and look at the areas of overlap and potential work there, I think is going to be incredibly important. I think we need to really understand life and the journey of a migrant, really understanding it from a global perspective of, the enormous numbers, 258, 260 million people who are on the move, but then also to take it down really to an individual level and understand the human beings that are caught up in this context and the challenges that they face in terms of the human rights abuses that they face. Legal status, the documentation, proof of identity, they stand as real challenges, but they must never be reasons really to deny people health services and well-being and to see people thrive. I also really want to flag, and you made the point, Father, around the role of faith-based organizations. The faith organizations have really been at the heart of the AIDS response right from the beginning, to where it was really just around palliative care and services, and now to a major part of the response in many ways, and urgently needs to continue that role and can play so much more active engagement too around services, but also around advocacy and around a positive attitude and some of the issues that you were raising around stigma and discrimination that we must overcome if we're going to really make a difference to the epidemic. And that's in the context, often we think of this in development settings, but obviously in emergency settings, in humanitarian crises as well. The church can and does play an incredibly important role. So thank you for that, and we very much look forward to continuing to work with you on that. I just really want to acknowledge and thank the focus in the workshop around a roadmap and a set of concrete actions rather than which can be practical and hold us all accountable to moving the agenda forward into the future, something that we can take forward at a global level, but also in countries where we are collaborating and working together. So I won't say more than that. I really look forward to the discussions over the next couple of days and hope we can really make a big difference to what we're all doing together. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, especially for acknowledging the role of faith-based leaders and organizations from the very beginning. And I think it's really important during these 2 days that we get to acknowledge each other. Also, the multilateral organizations have more and more been working with the faith-based organizations, and as was mentioned already, the strong role that PEPFAR has played in helping us to do that. And then finally, reminding us again, and I think we have to remind ourselves constantly during these 2 days that we need to lead to action. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to call on Wangari Thoreau, the representative of the NGO delegation to the UNAIDS Program Coordinating Board. Wangari?
The mic is acting. So good morning, everybody, and I would like to actually add my welcome to everybody else's, and for me, on behalf of the NGO delegation of UNAIDS PCB. And as you can see, I have no notes, so I'm going to ace it. I knew this morning that I was going to speak on this panel, and being a person who takes advantage of a situation, I'm going to say what I won't be able to say in the report that I'm going to be representing later. I am a migrant. I migrated from Kenya to Canada many years ago when the HIV epidemic was actually emerging in Kenya and largely in Africa. And if you asked me at that time if I would ever need services around HIV, I would definitely have said strongly no. Because I think we see HIV as an issue for somebody else and not personally for us. So for all those people who are migrating, the millions of people who are migrating, you have to be able to drill down to the personal level to be able to reach the person who you actually want to reach. And I actually see, because I work with an organization that provides healthcare services to immigrant, refugee, and non-status women from Africa, from Latin America, from South Asia, and from the Caribbean, I see how I felt about HIV those many years ago. It's still the same. So the HIV epidemic has expanded greatly, but the way we deal with HIV as migrants still remains the same. We deal with it in silence. We deal with it very fearful about stigma and discrimination, even entering into healthcare services, even when the healthcare is actually available. Many people may take them a long time before they actually end up in healthcare settings. So it's really important as we deliberate today that we think about how can we deliver services amid the restrictions that are actually there around services for migrant and mobile populations in the specific countries where they actually end up. And the many challenges that we all are aware of that populations on the move actually face. The other piece for me is around thinking about key populations. And key populations, we are talking about MSM, drug users, sex workers, young people who are actually on the move. And I think when you bridge between faith and HIV, fitting in key populations becomes very important. And today you have to deliberate around within the faith institutions which you actually represent, how do you work with key populations and ensure that they're actually also not left behind. The other piece is around, I do a survey every year at the organization where I work, and it's a client satisfaction survey, and I ask very specific questions. So, because you realize religion plays a very important role in the lives of mobile populations, and so I asked women, what does religion mean in your life, and what role does it play? And then I give people a range of points. 5 means it plays, maximum role in my life, and more than 70% actually say that religion influences their everyday decisions around health, around life, and everything else that they actually do. So when you have such a great influence on the lives of so many people, then you really need to think about how do you support people living with HIV, because they believe they're faithful to their faith institutions, yet when they need support around HIV, that faith is not usually forthcoming. So how do you ensure that you bridge that gap as you deliberate today? The other piece for the NGO delegation is that we're looking forward to actually getting the report or the way forward that is going to come from this meeting, because in addition to the report, the NGO report on people on the move that we produced last year, we're looking to having this report adding on to the report we produced last year, and actually trying to figure out the way forward on working with migrant and mobile populations. And we hope to come back to some of you to actually form a working group that is actually going to move these issues forward. So we're really looking forward to the report that is going to come from here.
Thank you, Wangari, and especially for also sharing your own migration story. But I wonder if I could ask a question. How many people in this room are migrants? Raise your hands. So I think this is, in a way, it's an unfair question because it's an international audience, but on the other hand, it also shows that migration is a fact of life. It's been since the beginning of humanity, and that's also one of the things that we need to bring from our faith communities to the wider society, especially because of the fear and the prejudice toward migrants and toward people living with or affected or at risk of HIV. So we have a lot of work to do. You reminded us of that, and also the action that we need to take. Now I'd like to call on Dr. Michael Grillo, the Branch Chief, Country Programs Division, the Director of Prevention and Education and Training, Defense Health Agency, also in the Research and Development of the Department of Defense, HIV and AIDS Prevention Program, and PEPFAR. And he's going to talk with us about enhancing communities of faith engagement for migrant populations. Michael?
Yes, I moved over here.
Oh, okay.
So let's see if this works, yeah? Yeah. So in true PEPFAR format, I'd like to have a few slides for you. So I promise I won't read you all of the slides, but I thought there's a few things that I put together that I think would be important for the group to remember. And what I like to hear about and hearing this morning's panel and everyone talk about is not just what we're going to do in a workshop and put together nice points, but really what are the action points and what are we going to leave with and start implementing and doing. So within PEPFAR, as you know, we're a speedy group and we like to get results. So in talking about that, when we look at faith-based groups and communities, we really know that PEPFAR has been committed since the beginning in really looking at what our faith-based communities can do. And we know that there's been a long history within PEPFAR and outside of PEPFAR with the support and care for people living with HIV disease. But I'd like to bring some thoughts today on how we can expand that and what we have been doing in the past and what we could do in the future. So a quick slide just looking at the history of PEPFAR. I'd be amiss to not note that PEPFAR in the beginning, and I've been very lucky to be involved with PEPFAR from the very beginning, and we had numerous faith-based organizations that were doing a lot of home-based care. So that was an era that was needed and supported for a lot of people, to where now, what do we need? We need testing, we need much more linkage into care and treatment, and we need a lot of messages. So there's a number of things you could look at for yourselves on there. Our initiative for this year, as you can look and see, is that we're really trying to restore a number of the COP funding activities that we had previously in 17 and 18 and restoring them this year. In addition, we're looking to see how can we understand the epidemic better, what are our missing pieces, and then how do we prevent sexual violence as well, especially amongst 9 to 14-year-old boys and girls. So what's the potential to be able to use? And very quickly you can see that, number one, we know that our faith-based communities have access and influence across many different populations, especially our migrants. So what are our advantages in this group here? I think number one, you have the ability to reach this age group in a number of different settings, and of course adults as well. But you can support the population of these ages by implementing a variety of different programs, such as community groups for people living with HIV disease, and I'll talk about in a second. But the reason why we do that is not only for our religious service, but also for the care services, the treatment service, the prevention messages that can be made across the board. The people trust the churches. They trust the groups, their congregations. So what we're hoping to do is build upon that. Let's not try something new. Let's build upon what we're doing already. So one of the things that I heard loud and clear, and this was a message that was sent to me when I was doing a group with Susan Hillis on the ground in Kenya, was the people trust the church, people more than anyone. They prefer them to the police. It's like the faith leaders are the bridge to the children's office. And that is a true statement. You know, people do trust the churches. I heard it this morning in discussions that I much rather trust the church than an NGO or the health department or someone else. I trust the people I'm working with. So thank you for that message this morning. What can we do? How do we do this for migrants, and how do we do this for the top population in general? Number one, standardized education materials. We don't need to create anything new. Everything that we have is already in existence. We need to modify our current materials and update them. We, number one, have to have great healthcare messages. What are they and how they should be, or what they should be, hopefully we'll do today. We need to understand. I think one of the things that's been missing, not only from all of PEPFAR, but all the programs that I've looked at, is really how are we educating our population, our migrant population, people living with HIV disease. We've done a poor job in educating our patients on their own disease. So I think we can do a much better job in talking about why it's important to learn about viral load, and why is it, you know, they hear the terms and they know the word of undetectable, but that doesn't mean a lot. So we need to really define that and put some real important messages in there. To what we use in the U.S. is one of the things that's been extremely helpful is the U equals U campaign, which is undetectable equals untransmissible. People understand that. They know if they're undetectable, it's a health benefit for them, plus it's also a benefit for their sexual partners. So we have prevention and we have great health care all mixed into that, but people don't understand that. Again, gender-based violence, there's a number of issues that we can work with and do a better job in with gender-based violence. Identification is one thing, but how are we treating, caring for, and having groups and support systems in place for people with gender-based violence. And then alcohol and drugs. You know, we have small groups, but we can expand a lot of that. It's, you know, I noticed that in many of our developing countries, what we're missing is the true counselors, a true program that help people living with HIV disease or just living with addiction. So what I would suggest that we really do, and what we can do together, is targeted testing. You know, the testing of just knowing your status in the U.S. and within PEPFAR and within our global programs should be shifting, because we don't have to test everyone, but we can do targeted testing. Where is that important? With our index, or our patients' partner notification. You know, our patients living with HIV disease, they acquired HIV disease from someone. Have we tested their families? Have we helped and supported them in ways that we can do a better job that's safe? How are we getting everyone onto treatment? So it's not our job to just test people. You know, when we test people, we have a commitment to get them into care and treatment. That is our job. As healthcare professionals, that's what we should be doing. Not the number of just the test, but the entire process in making sure that their treatment. When I've been working with HIV testing and counseling for years, since the 80s in the beginning of the epidemic. But one of the things that I think is important is I don't consider my job in the testing world or prevention world done until that patient is virally suppressed. That's when we've completed our job. So even no matter what point of the process you're in, it's not until that patient is virally suppressed that's important. Again, we want to make sure that people stay on treatment. Youth leaders have to be engaged, and they are great caregivers, plus they're also great peer educators, and we haven't used our expert clients enough across the board. Of course, that also comes with tracking and monitoring. So what are some of these things? Support services for victims when it comes to GBV. Of course, we want to hold people accountable. I think we don't do a great job when we don't have governments that are holding people accountable. It means nothing if we have all these great services that when people aren't held accountable, nothing happens. We also need to make sure that we're addressing these harmful norms. You know, I always remember the first trip that I was going on with PEPFAR. I was in Namibia. And I said, you know, we're talking with the Council on Gender, and we said, how do we change these activities that are happening? How do we talk to moms and get these things done? And they said, if you want to change the culture, it's not the moms or the dads. So I said, then where do we start talking? And they said, it's the grandmothers, because the grandmothers are home taking care of the kids. So we had to change our perspective. So again, as you're moving forward, please be flexible. We have to change, we have to modify. So opportunity is really to look at some of these peer educators that are doing phenomenal work in Kenya. I can't talk enough about the great work that our expert clients, some of them are young teenagers living with HIV disease, that most of them acquired it from birth, but it doesn't matter where they acquired it from. The issue is they're actually doing great work in getting their peers into testing, and they know who's at risk. So what are some examples here? We couldn't reach pediatric cases, but through these peer educators, you can see it, Kenya's on the end there, and they've done a great job on reaching pediatric cases and youth. Why? It's because they have that 000 program. So this is a program that this week I hope we look through and look at. WhatsApp messaging, you know, our group, our age group with us getting grayer and grayer, may not always be smart enough to know what the newest app is. But some of these apps are being used across the board, and we need to get our youth involved to tell us what they are so we can help implement a lot of these programs. We're doing it within clinical settings where we can remind patients about an appointment. What about prevention messages and things like that? Again, here's another program that you could see working with street boys, using WhatsApp and clinical service that's happening. All of these things are effective. But we constantly get defeat when you can see on the challenge on the bottom was one of the impoverished areas that we're looking at. There is young kids, 5 and 6 years old, that's being exposed to pornography that's being shown at night for very small money. So how do we compete against that? What do we do to inject ourselves to be able to stop this behavior from happening at such cheap rates and put ages on these things? So what I hope to do, last slide, is conquer these questions this week and put into place an action plan that we can do together that's not as hard as it seems. But one is general prevention messages that's really talking about hope and livelihood for our migrants. Testing and treatment that can lead to a healthy life. That positive message that that 20-year-old can live a greater than 50 years if they're diagnosed today and stay on their medications. That is an important message that people need to hear. Again, utilizing self-testing. How can we utilize self-testing across the board, whether it's assisted or non-assisted? Peers and experts to use. How do we increase our education and support for people living with HIV disease? Because, you know, we can test 100 people and we can give prevention messages for 100 people. But really, if we concentrate on just the people living with HIV disease, we have far greater reach than we can trying to reach a whole population. Plus, we don't have the funds to be able to reach whole populations like that. Again, a lot of these other issues that we'll talk about during this week, but when it comes to migrant workers, I really want us to pay attention to how do we not give up on our NGOs and our partners, but how do we help them through WhatsApp, through other applications that are cross-border support, because Getting them into care and treatment is one thing, keeping them in care and treatment is another. And that's important for us to remember this week so that we can work together to figure out what those solutions are. Again, thank you on behalf of Ambassador Birx. We thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Grillo, for sharing with us, and please transmit our thanks to Dr. Birx, too. She's been a very strong voice in the faith community in terms of recognizing the capacity and also challenging the faith communities to do more. Thank you for the practical actions. I think that our note takers working on the developing the roadmap you'll probably see those words in the roadmap. Thank you for sharing that. And then also for yourself challenging the faith communities to do more, but also to be more strategic and to look at where we could have the most impact. On that note, I would just say, I think we also have a deep impact because we focus on the human person. So we're not only looking at, the kind of strategic approaches, but the human person is at the center of it. And I think that's why there is so much trust in the faith communities. So I now would like to call on Francesca Merico, the HIV/AIDS coordinator for the campaign coordinator for the WCC Ecumenical Advocacy Alliance, to talk about the purpose and the structure of the workshop. Francesca.
Good morning. So my name is Francesca, and I coordinate the HIV campaign, the World Council of Churches. And the motto of our campaign is, the more we can speak and act together, greater our impact for justice will be. And it is really with this spirit that we are gathered here today. We have 21 different faith-based organizations present. We have 12 civil society organizations, including, we are really glad to have Groupe C de Genève here with us. We have UN agencies, and there are some permanent missions that are present with us today. And we are here, as we heard from the panelists, to discuss and identify actions together to make sure that the issues related to the vulnerability to HIV and TB of migrants and refugees and their limited access to services are addressed. So we want to make the discussion very lively. And we are keen to gather input and ideas from you in terms of key learning, key challenges, and key action. And this is to be included in the outcome document of the event that will be a roadmap, as you heard before. So if you look at the agenda that you have in front of you, we have 4 different panels. Each panel will have 4 speakers. They are going to share very interesting information about their work and their activities with migrants and refugees and access to services, but they also will offer recommendations to be included in the roadmap. And after the plenary discussion, we will have time for table discussion. We have a facilitator at each table and a note taker at each table. And we have guided questions to help us guiding the discussion, to have a very focused discussion for the roadmap. And remember, the discussion has to look at key learning, key challenges, and key action. And also you have in front of you some post-it, because what we want to do is capture as much as possible your ideas and recommendations. So when some brilliant ideas come to your mind, please take note of them. And we have 4 different walls behind you, just where the tents are. So we have a wall for the HIV prevention session there. We have one for the testing, treatment, care, and support session. We have one for violence and HIV, and one on eliminating stigma and discrimination. And you can also see that we have a bridge at the corner of the room, and the bridge is really to represent our desire to strengthen collaboration among different stakeholders that are present in the room. So if you have ideas about partnership, please write them down and stick them on the bridge. And Msgr Bob mentioned before that migration is part of our life, that most of us are migrants, and we have a beautiful map here. And one of the activities we will be doing is to indicate our own journey. And we will ask first the panelists here to indicate their journey in the map. Mark-Henry or Charlie will help them. And while they will do so, I'm going to ask each of you to take the little boat you have with you. You know that boat people are among the most vulnerable in the migration process. And so you take the boat and you write on the boat what are, according to you, the main challenges related to the topic of the workshop. And also you write the other side what you are expecting from this workshop. And then I will ask you to place this little boat on the bridge, on the stairs. Please do not walk on the bridge. Something else I wanted to tell you is about the marketplace. We have set that beautiful space behind you. It's like a souk. It's very lively. The idea is to create a dynamic space for dialogue, sharing, and networking. We will have 4 booths running in parallels for 15 minutes each. We will explain in details how the movement around the booth will work later at that time. And then another thing I wanted to say, we really wanted to make this day the day for the migrants and the refugees, so even lunch has been thought around them. We will offer Ethiopian food today and Congolese food tomorrow, and it will be offered in Salle 2 and 3 on the first floor. I think I said everything I had to say here. Oh, there will be a reception today at 6 p.m. and you're all very welcome, and we will have beautiful music from a migrant group as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for giving us this overview. But also there's something we need to say to you and to Marc-Henri and all of the staff here at WCC who have helped you, and also the volunteers. We need to say a big, big thank you to you because you've done a wonderful job in organizing this. Okay, we're now going to move into our panel 1 discussion on the overview of the global situation of people on the move in HIV, data, challenges, and commitments. So I think we're going to make some change from the head table. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So could I ask Dr. Carlos van der Laat, Ms. Ann Burton, Wangari again, and also Mr. Patrick Turan to come up.
UK, Kenya, India, Cambodia, South Africa, and Nigeria. Looks like everybody comes to the news.
Thanks. Okay, I'd like to welcome our panel, and I'd call on Dr. Carlos van der Laat first from the Migrants Health Assistance Program. He's the coordinator of that program, the Migrant Health Division of IOM, the UN Agency for Migration. And he'll talk about general overview of data and challenges.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here Thank you for this opportunity. You know, life is unfair. They gave me only 5 minutes, so I need to run. No, but yes, 6 minutes. Okay, there's one more there. So as IOM, we are committed to work towards addressing HIV risk and vulnerabilities in all the phases of the migration cycle. So we focus a lot in terms of pre-departure, transit, destination, return, resettlement. We are really convinced that the only way to do it, that the only way to reach that outcome, that objective, is basically through partnerships and joint efforts. So therefore, I am very happy to be here and really looking forward to share practices, conversations, concerns, and basically strengthen the migration health network. A disclaimer in terms of this presentation is that this is about the general overview, but well, basically in 5 minutes I don't have a lot of time, so my presentation is focused in the negative side of migration, but I am also convinced that all of us here in this room already know that migration is very positive for society, and if it's done under safe and order manners, it is really important for our societies. But yes, the context is a little bit negative in this presentation, I would say. But I would like to start with some words from Kofi Annan, who said, today's real borders are not between nations, but between powerful and powerless, free and fettered, privileged and humiliated. And I think this reflects exactly what is happening now in this world. It's not about borders. It's not about geographical, lines. No, we're talking about inequality. We're talking about powerful, against poor. We're talking about privilege against humiliated. And this is really, really important in terms of what we're doing here. I think this is an important perspective of our current context, regarding migrants, refugees, displaced persons, and basically because we're living in a world of inequality on a society who loves to tag, to classify, and sometimes we decide in terms of those tags. And this is a reality check, and we need to fight against this. So let's talk a little bit about the context. Human mobility, migration, the displacement. It is a very complex process. It is also ever-changing. We're talking today with a context, and maybe tomorrow we will have another crisis. We will have another situation, another caravan, another group of people, stranded in a border. This changes every day. So it is very, very important because to understand this, because it is a very complex process. It is ever-changing and also requires a multidimensional approach. But at least for these 5 minutes, I would like to blame globalization, which implies development. Globalization implies development, but also exacerbates inequalities, and that's where we need to focus. Globalization implies the opening of local and nationalistic perspectives to a broader outlook of interconnected and interdependent world, of free transfer of capitals, goods, services across national frontiers. But it seems that sometimes this opening doesn't include people, doesn't include the person, the family who is making this globalization possible. And that is exactly where we need to go. People mainly move for labor and economical reasons, demographic factors, also persisting disparities and unbalanced distribution of wealth, opportunities, and employment, all of them sustain migration. We also have this big threat of climate change, with conflicts, with disasters, and a lot of disasters that will be increasing now with climate change, that will also produce or be the cause for migration, and we also need to focus in those conditions. With all this and more happening at the same time, as never before, I would say that migration is an issue of global geopolitical relevance. And here we have some numbers. Basically, migration has more than doubled over the last 25 years. Now we see more women on the move with all many vulnerabilities. We see more children also, some of them walking alone, from a country to another country, with very risky situations. Almost 1 million people are considered being in the move, some of them internally and some internationally, and this trend is unlikely to be reversed. I mentioned a lot this group of internal migrants also, because for us in the health sector, in the HIV response, we need to focus also on them. Sometimes we talk about migration and we always think about the international migrants. But no, I mean, there's a big number of people also moving within a border, within a country, that also are in need of and that are also under big vulnerabilities, also related to their migration cycle. So in an increasingly mobile society, with 1 of every 7 people on the move, for this workshop, we need to recognize the magnitude of our challenge. A context of 68 million people forcibly displaced due to persecution, violence, or human rights violations, including living with HIV as a cause, 18 million newly displaced by disasters, the very sad reality of the modern slavery, with 25 million people as victims of forced labor, and the very sad project that we have in IOM is called Missing Migrants, with more than 6,000 lives lost or missing during 2017. And this is the registered, the ones that were registered, but we also know a lot of missing people also in those routes, very risky routes. So all this somehow endorsed also by a toxic discourse with growing xenophobia and discrimination. And this is our challenge. I mean, this is why we're here. This is the idea for these 2 days, to sit down, to have a long conversation on how we can improve our work, how can we work as a network, how can we really work more and better to improve their condition in life. And well, later on, I will be talking about the specific challenges of the migration process within the HIV response and the ways forward. We are very optimistic now with the global agenda, very positive in terms of the Global Compact on Migration, the World Health Assembly resolution called Promoting the Health of Refugees and Migrants. I will talk about that in another presentation. So basically my role during this presentation was to give a general overview of this challenge in 5 minutes. Thanks, Francesca, for 5 minutes, okay. The last slide is just a commercial because this is the framework that I will be also discussing during the marketplace in our UN booth. So you are also invited to come visit us now during the marketplace to discuss about this framework. So thank you very much, and yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Carlos. You had a monumental task and you succeeded in the time frame. Thanks for sharing the numbers with us, but also for that last slide reminding us that the real way forward is inclusion of all people. And Pope Francis often tells us in the Catholic Church that the situation of migration is much more than numbers. We have to remember the person and the family behind each of those numbers if we really want to respond adequately. And now I'd like to call on Ms. Ann Burton, the Chief of the Public Health Section of the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and she'll speak about refugees and HIV, a general overview about data and challenges also.
Thank you very much, and it is indeed a great honor to be here. So Carlos stated that he had 6 minutes. We're actually very lucky this morning. We've got 7 minutes to go through this, so it will be a very, very quick overview, and hopefully there will be time for questions later. Okay. So Carlos has already gone through some of the data, and I'm not going to dwell on this just in terms of the numbers, but just to say that there are UNHCR's persons of concern include asylum seekers, refugees, returnees, internally displaced and stateless persons. So there was 71.4 million persons of concern to us at the end of 2017. And just to remind ourselves that the world is now witnessing the highest levels of forced displacement on record. This includes, so this 71 million includes 19.9 million refugees under UNHCR's mandate. In terms of refugees and HIV, UNHCR has been a co-sponsor of UNAIDS since 2004. UNAIDS, as you know, is the joint UN program on HIV, which includes 10 other co-sponsors as well as the UNAIDS Secretariat. Each member of UNAIDS brings a comparative advantage to address HIV as a complex issue in an integrated way involving multiple sectors. UNHCR is the agency that's mandated to protect and assist refugees and other populations of concern. So within UNAIDS, UNHCR, along with WFP, co-convenes the UNAIDS Division of Labour area, which is HIV services in humanitarian situations, as well as the inter-agency task team on HIV in humanitarian situations. So our HIV activities, of course, HIV is not only a health issue, it is also a human rights issue and a protection issue, but many of the services that we provide are provided through the health sector. We are currently updating our strategy, but just to say that HIV reproductive health is included in our global strategy for public health, which has been extended into 2019. So it's actually very well integrated into our healthcare services. So, as I said, HIV is a health issue as well as a human rights issue. Many of the factors that increase risk and vulnerability to HIV in humanitarian situations are directly linked to and mitigated by a strong response in assistance and protection. Just to say that UNHCR doesn't provide services ourselves. We work through partners. Most of our partners are national governments, but we actually have 900 NGOs that are on our partnership that we partner with globally, including 200 that provide health services. So just in brief, we fund HIV-specific activities to increase access and quality of treatment and prevention. We also fund related areas, including gender-based violence, reproductive health, TB, and social protection, all of which increase both risk and vulnerability to HIV. We advocate for the inclusion of refugees and other populations of concern into national HIV strategies, and I will show you how successful we have been with that. We also collect, analyze, report, and publish HIV-related data, including debunking myths relating to HIV and refugees, which has resulted in strengthened protection for refugees. Just to also say as well that in a humanitarian, for those of you that are used to working in a humanitarian setting, we talk about clusters or sectors. There is no HIV cluster or sector. HIV is meant to be integrated throughout the humanitarian response. Just some recent trends that we've noted in responding to HIV in humanitarian and in particular refugee situations. So many more people now that are affected by conflict are already on antiretroviral treatment. So 10 years ago we were having the debate, do we provide refugees or displaced populations antiretrovirals? Now they're crossing the border already on antiretroviral. So it's now a part of the immediate humanitarian response is to continue providing treatment. HIV is now seen as a chronic illness, which is manageable. So we're looking at the aging of a HIV-affected population. We're seeing more substantive and differentiated national responses. So it's not one size fits all. We need to be able to integrate refugees and displaced populations into national programs where that vary based on the HIV epidemiology. Also, as was stated by one of the speakers this morning, the importance of key populations in all situations. For example, sex workers and men who have sex with men. And more than half of these that are newly infected with HIV today are between 15 and 24 years of age. And then what we're actually seeing now is also greater integration of displaced populations into national HIV systems, and I will show you a slide. But longer term planning and development funding is not able to respond to immediate humanitarian needs. So even if we have, for example, refugees accessing services that are partially supported by the Global Fund, if we get a massive influx of refugees, that national system is not able to respond, even if the will is there. So inclusion of refugees into national systems. This is a self-reported survey that we did recently of 30, in fact it was done in more countries, but we've only compiled the data. So 30 countries hosting refugees globally. And so just as an example, so we have 93% of those countries refugees are able to access antiretrovirals through the national system. So this is a huge step from where we came 10 years ago. And then looking at the Global Fund, looking at HIV, we were looking at TB, HIV, and malaria. But for those countries where there is a Global Fund grant in HIV and they're hosting refugees, 93% of those countries are providing antiretrovirals to refugees through that Global Fund grant. So just to say, again, coming back to Carlos's comment, we don't want to put a negative spin on everything. There has been huge progress made, but we still have a way to go. This, I don't want you to look at this slide, but just to show, that we have collected data looking at the 1990 progress this was in 10 refugee sites in 6 countries. We're actually collecting it from more, but we have compiled it. Not an easy exercise, but and it was done through routinely collected data systems as well, so not from a survey. But just to say the progress, so with regards to, 90% of persons living with HIV knowing their status, only 50% of sites reached more than 90%. So we're still not identifying people that are living with HIV in refugee situations. But we're very good at, once they're identified, linking them with care. So 80% of sites actually reached the target of more than 90%. The third 90 we're also not doing so well on. So none of the sites reached the 90% of persons living with HIV on ART being virally suppressed. We're close, but we're not there yet. So we still have a lot of work to go on that, on those two ends of the 90. Just very, very briefly about rights-based approaches, and we'll talk a little bit more just to show that that persons living with HIV who are displaced are at one of the groups that are most at risk of human rights violations. We're still seeing, in addition to stigma, discrimination, arbitrary arrest, we're still seeing mandatory testing of refugees being applied in some countries. It's it's getting better, but it's still not going away. For third country resettlement countries, most of these countries have waivers, but we do need to, for refugees, meaning that even if they are HIV positive, they will still resettle them. But we need to update that with the current situation. Just to say that we have policy approaches. There's some unique situations relating to refugees, and that is that, so this document, this is 10 key points on HIV and protection, so that the HIV status of an asylum seeker should not be a barrier to access to territory in the country of asylum, that people should not be forcibly returned on the basis of HIV, and that access to what we call durable solutions should not be impacted by HIV status. And just as we have developed joint guidelines on access to HIV testing with UNAIDS and with WHO, and applying protection principles to testing for refugees. And lastly, just to talk about the sort of the some of the changing contexts. Of course, we know that there is reduced funding for HIV, though there is still a lot of donor support. Donors are being torn in a lot of forced to deal with a lot of different issues. So, but now is not the time to be taking our eye off HIV, but we do need to be having much more integrated approaches. We're seeing remarkable progress on treatment with near average life expectancy, but keep in mind there's still 20 million people globally that are not on treatment. So there's still a significant gap. Of course, prevention, HIV incidence is only declining in sub-Saharan Africa, and slow progress on human rights. And in humanitarian situations, we need to be strategic how we address HIV and promote a response that is proportionate. We're seeing some situations where HIV is given too much attention based on the prevalence, and other situations where it's not given enough. And so, the HIV response needs to be based on the prevalence, the HIV prevalence, and the local and national capacity and strategy, and also the level of interventions that are available to the host community. So we look forward to hearing feedback from you and taking forward the recommendations over the next couple of days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and especially for reminding us that HIV is not just a health issue, but a human rights issue, and in the case of displacement, certainly that means protection is very necessary. Thanks also for sharing that you are working with 900 NGO partners. My organization, from the very beginning of the organization, was one of those partners and still is, and we're very pleased to have that collaboration with UNHCR. We also found in our organization that, especially in the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, in the health clinics that we sponsor in the camps there, that it's helped a lot for us to do training of the local police around those human rights issues, and helping them even just to understand the status of refugees and why they have special protection due to them. So we have found some good results and much fewer arrests because of that. And now, Sorry, I'm losing my my place here. So now we go to Wangari, and Wangari is going to speak about the UNAIDS Program Coordinating Board report that they recently gave on the whole issue of migration and HIV.
You can see why I said what I said earlier, that I'm going to race through this report, and I'm the only one who actually got 12 minutes. It's because this report is very important for this meeting. And I'm actually going to start with a quote from one of the participants who was involved in the generation of the report. I wish other countries would accept us without denying our basic right to health. I think this frames the report and illustrate why we needed to do this very clearly. Why did we focus our report on people on the move? In the NGO report from the UN NGO delegation in 2017, titled 10-10-10 NGO report, highlighted that mobile populations are overrepresented among people living with HIV who are undiagnosed, those not on antiretroviral therapy and not virally suppressed. This was actually very evident even in countries that had actually achieved or exceeded the 1990 targets. So we decided to focus on people on the move because of that. In the report, we have used terms such as people on the move or human mobility, since they are comprehensive terms and include a whole range of people who are on the move, in international migration, refugees, people experiencing internal or forced displacement, people moving because of climate change, as highlighted earlier, and labor migrants. If you want to know the details of how we actually generated the data for this report, you can refer to the NGO report, which you can actually get on the website of the NGO delegation. It's very accessible. The report actually highlights certain trends. And the first trend we actually noted was the increasing diversity and complexity of human mobility. And in addition to people who are moving because they're looking for better economic opportunities, as well as family reunification, people are being forced to actually move because of conflict, climate change, violence, political oppression, economic collapse. We know what is happening in Venezuela currently, environmental or human-induced disasters, and food insecurity, as well as famine. Other people are moving because they have HIV or TB, or they're escaping because of their sexual orientation, to escape stigma and discrimination, or to have better access to HIV treatment or other healthcare services. In 2017, there were about 30 million people displaced as a result of conflict and disasters across 143 countries. This actually highlights that information very clearly. The only reason this person moved is not because they were looking for a new job or a way of life, but they knew if they moved to Brazil, they would have access to ARVs. And then the next trend, hey, this is stuck, and I hope my minutes are still not counting. Trend number 2 was feminization of movement. And we all know that mobility is not gender neutral. We have more women who are moving, and currently about 11 million people on the move globally, 70% are women who are domestic workers. 70% are women. Women also move not because of economic reasons, but in addition to seek greater personal freedom and opportunities for themselves. They may be fleeing violence or abusive relationships, or escape from patriarchal systems that limit what they can do, they can be as women. We also have women, children, and the elderly, comprising about 80% of asylum seekers and refugees fleeing from violence. So females on the move face unique vulnerabilities to HIV, abuse, sexual violence, increasing trafficking, as well as many gender inequalities. So that was highlighted very clearly in the report. Trend number 3, new health paradigm linking development and people on the move. People on the move feature very clearly in sustainable development goals and their targets. And SDGs actually recognize the rights and vulnerabilities of people on the move and their contribution and social benefits of their mobility. And they're actually seen as a way of ensuring or sustaining development. All of us know the remittances a lot of people living abroad send to their countries, which is seen as a positive way, means of mobility. In addition, SDG 10.7 calls for member states to facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration. And the Declaration for Refugees and Migrants in 2016, member states committed to developing a compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, and this resulted in the Global Compact on Migration adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2018. The fourth trend, the need for new approaches to think about mobility. We noted there was lack of a shared understanding of what mobility means, resulting in challenges in understanding and addressing the links between mobility and HIV. In the report, you will note we have about 14 different definitions on people on the move. And there needs to be new thinking on population and movement and HIV risk to be more specific and to be inclusive of who is moving, how they are moving, why, and the origins and destinations of where they're actually going. Trend number 5 was around challenges to globalization, and we already had earlier that this is problematic and is a key driver of recent expansion, but it's challenged with migration facing growing opposition. And if you see a lot of debates in a lot of countries, migration is seen to undermine national identity, increases competition for national resources, or puts pressure on national resources and capacities. And we need to think about how to come up with more productive policies that actually support people on the move. In the report, we find that 9 countries do not allow people living with HIV to actually enter. 51 countries have some form of restrictions on entry, stay, as well as residency for people living with HIV. We also have, the next part of the report looks at key health impacts and HIV vulnerabilities. And the report groups these into 4 categories: continuity of care, or the care continuum, financing healthcare for mobile populations, HIV co-infections and risk environments, as well as, some of the issues around stages of the movement itself. So in terms of continuity of care, and here we're looking at a whole spectrum starting from HIV testing, diagnosis, engagement in care, initiation of ART, and achieving and sustaining viral suppression. And you can see all the issues you all have faced around working with migrants. The continuum of care has a lot of challenges, and I'm sure you have seen all of them, so I won't list them, talk about one by one. The next impact was around financing of healthcare for mobile populations, the need for accurate data to support financing and program delivery for mobile populations. So issues around data, and the report proposes that data that is required should show migration flows, the extent of access to services for mobile populations, experiences of stigma and discrimination, and the burden of HIV, particularly for key populations, such as men who have sex with men, sex workers, people who use drugs, as well as young women, trans men and women. But also looking at the wider benefits of addressing the health of people on the move. And of course, the report highlights several financing models from different countries on supporting people on the move, and you can look for the specifics in the report. We also have as the section on impacts resulting from risk disparities, the intersections of mobility and other dimensions of identity, geography, create risk disparities. For example, a gendered trans identity is at higher risk, belonging to one or several key populations, so intersections of identity, or moving from one region to a region with a higher prevalence of HIV, and having to engage with varieties of health systems. So mobility may also result in criminalization, particularly of MSM, sex workers, and drug users. It may also result in employment precarity, social isolation, and marginalization. And last, on impacts, detention and deportations are scaled up, particularly if people who come from the UK, people getting detained as well as deported. In the US in particular, currently, border regions seems to be excluded from human rights law and obligations and ignore the human rights of people on the move. Issues within legal system, criminalization of HIV non-disclosure, sexual practices in a lot of countries, as well as prohibition of non-sex workers from migrating. But we don't just rely on, highlight the issues. We also highlighted good examples of good practice, case studies. And this is a quotation from somebody from the US talking about the agencies that are providing services for migrants. And the most successful reflect the populations they actually serve. So they have staff from those, from migrant populations working there. So here's a whole list of the examples of good practices. You can review them in detail in the report. So where do we go from here? That's a whole report with a lot of issues highlighted. So the question is, where do we go from here? And this is my last slide. At the PCB meeting in December, the board adopted this decision point based on the report and the recommendations that were actually made. And the joint program needs to support member states in partnership with communities and civil society organizations and other partners in accordance with the law context, and priorities to be able to have, point number one, at least a basic package of HIV prevention, treatment, support, and care for migrant populations as they deem appropriate through strengthening of international cooperation. The second point was to contribute to the generation and improvement of data to produce the evidence to inform whatever actions are going to be taken. We highlighted the issue of data. It was highlighted earlier. So countries need to start generating the data that is required at the national, region, and local level around HIV and migration. Review and adopt laws, policies, and practices that prevent migrants and mobile populations from accessing life-saving treatment with a particular focus on key populations. You can see in this document, key populations are a certain focus so that they're actually not left behind. Strengthen technical capacity so that national health system address HIV and comorbidities among migrant and mobile populations, as well as refugees and crisis-affected populations, and encourage enabling environment for cooperation between systems, communities, civil society, as well as ensuring resources are available. And of course, an expectation that UNAIDS will be reporting back on the progress that is made based on these decision points. So part of the discussion today is, you can see we already have a way forward for the NGO report. So whatever else we get from here is what we're going to focus on in moving this issue forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Wangari. It was a very comprehensive report that was given and good feedback from you on this. I won't try to even summarize anything there, but just to say I was really pleased that you mentioned the two global compacts. You mentioned migration, but also the global compact on refugees, because after the summit in 2016, we saw that the New York Declaration had very little mention of health in that document. And so a number of the multilateral organizations and civil society, including faith-based groups, worked very hard during the negotiations of the compacts to be sure that health was included there. Now, of course, the test is whether governments implement what was said about health in those compacts and about many other things in the compacts. So I now would like to call on Mr. Patrick Turan from the Global Migration Policy Associates to talk about mobilizing together a global framework for rights-based action on migration, health, and HIV. Pat?
Well, thank you, Bob. I first of all, actually, as a migrant for more than 34 years in Latin America, in African countries, and here in Europe, would like to thank Francesca for, in a way, welcoming me back to one of my homes. I served here at the World Council of Churches as Secretary for Migration for almost a decade in the 1990s, and I've had a long history in the UN, in faith-based organizations, and in civil society as well. I'd like to pick up on keywords that Olav Tveit launched this morning. Join forces, work together. And Tim Martineau followed by speaking of a roadmap and a set of concrete actions. And I appreciate then that Wangari started with a reference to the right to health and then proceeded to provide us with a diagnosis and an assessment of what the challenges we face are in this arena of rolling back HIV and AIDS. I'd like to, in a sense, follow that diagnosis with a prescription and a treatment plan and lay out for you at least an introduction to a framework for action. You, in fact, have the essence of the framework in front of you on your tables. It was on your seat. We've shared it with you because, in essence, this framework for action is part of a bigger book that was published last year But what's relevant here is that it represents more than 2 years of intense research around the world looking at law, policy, and practice on migration, health, and specifically HIV and AIDS, in order to look at what is being done, what works, how it works or should work together, and what we can see are effective approaches to ensuring that people's right to health is always respected and realized, including for all of the migrants in the world, and that in particular, specific action to realize that right to health is taken in the areas of HIV and AIDS and also TB, tuberculosis, that was referred to, I think, justifiably this morning. The responses, in fact, that we've seen to the HIV epidemic have shown that in the face of daunting challenges, enormous success can be achieved when stakeholders participate in a comprehensive and coordinated response. Safeguarding of rights, enforcement of appropriate laws, and application of international human rights and labor standards are essential foundations for what a couple of my predecessors on this panel have referred to as rights-based or rights-based approach. The framework you have in front of you comprises an extensive, complex, and holistic agenda for action on migration, health, and HIV. It demonstrates, however, that there are no simple solutions or quick fixes. Rather, a very complex, integrated, interrelated approach is necessary. To say a bit more about where this comes from, the work some of us started on this, I think, comprehensive manual or anthology actually started in 2009 under ILO auspices, that is to say International Labour Office, in conjunction with UNAIDS. And over the process of developing this, there was a lot of interchange, back and forth peer review with UNHCR, with IOM, with UNAIDS, a bit less, but also with WHO, and a number of faith-based and civil society actors. We looked literally at hundreds. I think we examined fairly carefully about 200 practices, good practices, policy approaches, and so on. You'll find many of them listed or at least identified in this book. You have in front of you a little flyer on the book that gives you the website for free downloading of the document. And you'll find maybe there are even a few of those represented in this room that are in that. And it says that this framework for action is really a reflection of putting together, analyzing, and presenting in a coherent way what people are already doing around the world. The framework also, of course, derives from the global knowledge base on HIV and AIDS, migration and health, and it draws on a number of international consultations on the subject, and particularly in the area of migration and health, including the first and second global consultation on migration and health, the second one held in Colombo, Sri Lanka in February of 2017, co-organized essentially by the WHO and the International Organization for Migration. Let me just note its structure, because the structure we determined essentially reflected how people are doing and the way they approach the different related issues. So, as you'll see in the framework, it has 10 kind of main topics: human rights and labor rights. Secondly, migration governance. Third, social protection. Fourth, public health policy. Fifth, decent work conditions and occupational safety and health. Sixth, law and policy development. 7, ensuring access to HIV and AIDS services. That was just in fact emphasized by a couple of my colleagues on the panel. 8, specific actions for refugees, asylum seekers, and IDPs, internally displaced persons. 9, specific approaches for mobile workers, people who are in shipping, trucking, maritime, and so on. And 10, addressing specifically segments of migrant populations at particular risk. You'll see those listed, so I won't go into them. At the same time, on the one hand, we identified what people are doing as key actions on each theme, in some cases, a whole number of them, and in some cases, you'll find key actions, see an identification of 5 cross-cutting key principles for action, because they applied everywhere to all actions to everyone. First of all, upholding inclusion, participation, and freedom of association. Secondly, complying with relevant international law and standards. Thirdly, incorporating gender considerations and specific attention to the specific situation of women and also of children in migration and in general. There is no one-size-fits-all. Fourthly, obviously, and it's been spoken here, addressing discrimination and stigma across the board. And fifthly, we say very simply, facilitating communication and respect. That, I think, in essence, says what's in there. What I would add to that, from the experience of working on this now for about 10 years, is I think you have, for this event and for the work ongoing, a pretty good and pretty thorough compilation of what's being done, some assessment, not complete, on what works, but more importantly, an underlying approach that says it's not only a matter of dealing with the victims, or dealing, if you will, with the people who are at risk of HIV and ultimately AIDS. But it's also a question of recognizing that most of the risks of HIV and AIDS and TB and other pathologies facing migrants and other populations are the result not of their own identity or behavior, but they are the result of what the WHO calls social, political, and environmental determinants of health. The situation women find themselves in, the oppression of LGBT people, the denial of even the existence of migrants and refugees in undocumented situations. I would like to leave it at there to be mercifully brief and just suggest that you have on the table a useful guide and documentation that will be helpful to you, helpful to all of us in the proceedings of this consultation over the next couple of days, and looking at that all-important admonition that I will conclude with, which is, again, that we need to join forces, continue joining forces and work together. And that means broadly migrant health concerns, extension of health protection to migrants, and it means action by all of those most concerned, not only the faith-based organizations and multilateral organizations here, but also public health actors, migration officials, health practitioners generally, social partners, that is to say employers and the trade unions in the workplaces where 90% of adult migrants and refugees ultimately find themselves. And of course, civil society advocates, legislators who need to pass those laws to protect and allow for full participation, and of course, faith-based organizations who are well represented here along with civil society groups. Thank you very much, and carry on, we work together.
Thank you very much, Pat, for showing mercy in terms of being more brief, but also for the great work that you've done over these years in terms of this report and many, many other migration-related efforts. We're really behind schedule, so I'm going to ask us not to do the plenary discussion, but to go right into the table discussions, because I think that's a place where there's a lot more possibility of sharing with each other. We'll also cut the table discussions to 20 minutes and then ask the groups to bring back one recommendation from each of the table discussions. So that will take about 10 minutes to report on.
Table number 1, we need a common prevention, care, and treatment package acknowledging the innate dignity of every human being to be free of stigma and discrimination, and then tailored to specific populations and appropriately funded.
Sounds like that's the whole roadmap. Thank you. Thank you very much. Table number 2.
Great, thank you. We recognize that there's a need for a mapping exercise on the people on the move and what organizations at local level are providing services, whether they be faith-based organizations or community-based organizations, and what types of services they are providing locally, so that they can bridge between people on the ground, the local providers of these services, and meet the needs of the whole person and not just provide HIV services.
Okay, thank you. Table number 3.
Give it a mic up, or if you want here.
Thank you. Table number 3 recognizes that different countries at different levels of development, especially with the health systems. And as such, we recommend that such complicated systems should be accessible to every refugee or migrant, and that these services should be integrated and confidential.
Thank you. Table number 4.
Thank you. Our opinion, this HIV agenda need to include the migrants and refugees as a part of national plans and strategic plans to overcome epidemic, as well as create special interventions for them. Consider them not just like troubles, but population, like as a populations group too. And this thematic has to be included in the mission mandates of different United Nations agencies, NGOs, and all stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 5.
Hi. We decided, and we hope you all listen to it, there needs to be a shorter bridge between the FBOs and the policy and funding system. So the FBOs can have the financial power to work with the daily challenges they see. And we like to have more data for good research. Thank you all.
I think we heard the loudest applause for that one, so 6.
Bonjour, alors nous avons décidé...
Hello, we decided as a recommendation to ask for greater continuity of undertaking commitments by governments towards HIV-positive people and mobilization of churches and religious communities to strengthen partnerships between religious communities, associations, NGOs to coordinate action in the field.
Okay. Number 7.
Hello. So for us, it was more the recommendation of working together sounds really good on paper, but how do we actualize it on the ground? And so our recommendation is maybe to learn from those who have successfully joined and worked together, especially when it comes to how to reach the most vulnerable populations, addressing the social, structural, systematic injustices, drivers of inequity, migration, and HIV. So on a global level, it looks good, but those of us who are implementing on the ground, we have so many barriers towards working together. So maybe learn from those who have been able to do it.
And table number 8.
Thank you. So I think echoing a number of the other tables, our recommendation broadly was for greater accountability for national governments in working effectively with civil society groups supporting migrants and refugees, and to particularly ensure that their policies are not hindering work in local communities or overarching global efforts. So we said the roads most in need of repair are those between civil society and national governments.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I think that's all the tables that have reported. You have the instructions at your table about where to send your recommendations, so please follow those. If you have any questions, you could ask David or Carlos, because I think they've been very much involved in formulating the plan, okay? Then we're going to take a break now for 20 minutes. So it's now about 11:30. So at 11:50 we'll come back, okay? And the break is outside.